everyone, it's Mike from CMS Critic. I'm here in my hometown of Edmonton. I'm going to be talking with ShoutCMS today, specifically Dragan, who is the CEO. I'm not going to bother telling you his last name because with a first name like Dragan, we don't really need to talk about what the last name is. So Dragan's going to discuss today ShoutCMS, how they're going to shake up the industry, and then you're going to get a big insight into them on our featured week. So hey, thanks for having me.
Good to have you, Mike.
So once we've got the introduction out of the way, let's talk a little bit about yourself, Dragan. I mean, I know you, but people on my site may not be familiar unless they've looked up Edmonton CMSs. But you guys are getting ready to hit the big time and to really start showcasing your product on our site specifically. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how ShoutCMS came to be, what your line of thinking is around why your product is going to be the next big thing for everybody.
So ShoutCMS started as a regular web design company, and we've been using it as our advantage in the industry for a long time. And about 5 years ago, we decided to take ShoutCMS public and have it compete in the arena with other CMSs. ShoutCMS is a culmination of, I think, what businesses need to do most. And so it's managing their website. It's got mass mail built in, a really strong form engine. It's got invoicing and billing and client management. And I think our differentiator in the industry is kind of how we put everything together. And we're pretty excited to launch that.
Right, you guys have the, one of the things that we'd talked about before is the way that you're treating pages as products and vice versa. So you've got a really interesting integration, whereas there's a lot of companies that have, they might have mass mail as a separate component, they might have invoicing as a separate component, they might have the e-commerce piece as a separate component. And then there's some that have kind of the individual chunks that you can buy separately, but when you get ShoutCMS, it's kind of the all-in-one solution with everything built into it. Do you want to talk a little bit about what drove you there?
I think we did some really novel things in the way that we combined content and e-commerce. And so traditionally what you have in the industry is you have systems that either started off as CMSs or as e-commerce systems. And what you're finding now is that the e-commerce systems are adding content and the CMSs are adding e-commerce. And I think what you find, the experience of that isn't very good, because a system that's focused on content doesn't really work good for e-commerce and vice versa. What we've done is spent a lot of time figuring out the best way of combining the two. And when we take a look at the industry, what people are wanting is they're wanting a good combination of both. And so e-commerce systems have a lot of content that are really important for marketing, for communication, for other things. And vice versa, companies that have predominantly content need to sell products. And what you've had historically is CMSs with either a plugin or something where you click off to get the e-commerce portion or vice
Integration
versa.
points, yeah. And I think for you guys, part of the line of thinking when you were putting the product together as well was to take that opportunity when you've got a customer that's going to be perhaps using a CMS for the first time, or specifically using your CMS for the first time. It's taking the opportunity to not just give them a tool, but also to show them how to use it really well, right? And sort of take that chance to kind of guide them on how to properly produce solid content. And I think in a lot of the interviews I've done previously, one of the things I've been bringing up consistently is we need to do that in the industry. We need to take that opportunity, like you and I have discussed before over drinks, right? It's like you need to have this opportunity when it's put in front of you to say, hey, here's a tool, but instead of just giving you a tool, I'm going to give you a tool and I'm going to show you what you need to fill in and how to produce your better content.
So I think you're touching on something really important, and it's an issue in our industry. I think our industry, and some to extent us, are metaphorically in making the button work. And as the industry grows, we're all adding new features and we're optimizing those features. But when we talk to clients, they are still having challenges using these systems. And so using the system is one thing, but really having something that works with your business is something else. Where I think that the industry is going, and we're moving in that direction, is building best practice into the software. And so imagine using a piece of software that every time that you use it, it teaches you on the very best way to create a page, the very best way to create a product, the very best way to create a campaign. And that's another layer above just, you know, the system working. So I think that if you know, companies like ShoutCMS focus on that, it'll very quickly change the business community.
So, yeah, I mean, absolutely will, for sure. I think that's one of the things that's really got to be focused on a lot more. Is that's kind of the next evolution, right? We've got the everyone's starting to integrate marketing. We've gone through that. Everyone's starting to integrate e-commerce. We've gone through that. Everyone's done the responsive thing. Now it's, okay, you've got the tools now. What are you going to do with them? And educating the customer, I think, is really where the opportunity lies now.
It still surprises me that within the industry, as far as we've gone, when you talk to the average business customer, they're still having a hard time with the system. One of the things that we've spent a lot of time on is balancing ease of use with complexity. And so when you kind of look at the landscape of products, on one side we have products that are really easy to create. So they're really easy to create, they look fantastic, but as a business they don't really translate into sales, or they're really difficult to manage after they're launched. On the other hand, you have bigger platforms that have tremendous functionality, but unless you're hiring somebody to manage it on an ongoing basis, it's not really usable. And so I think what Shout is a mix of both of those. And so it's really great if you have 5 to 10 pages. It works even better if you have 500 or 1,000 pages, and that's really difficult. That's a really difficult challenge to overcome.
One of the things that I think that's interesting too is there's all these. There always seems to be a focus, especially right now. I mean, let's just let the cat out of the bag, right? When you have products like WordPress, all these development houses, these design houses that are moving to software like WordPress, which, you know, it's traditionally a blogging platform first. Yes, it's got the ability to run a website on it, but you've got to be able to bring in all these third-party plugins to be able to do it. So you've got the reliability on all these external providers to hope that their plugin's not going to break your site down the road by adding additional functionality. And then you've got, as a customer, a lot of customers are looking at that and saying, okay, well, the cost factor of WordPress is, well, it's free to download, right? Okay, and then the plugins are going to be free, well, for the most part. But when it comes to the support aspect, that's when they're sitting there and they're thinking to themselves, oh, now what do I do? Open source is great, and I'm a proponent of open source products. I think they've done a ton of good. But how do you speak to how your product competes against something along those lines? Like if you come up in a customer meeting and the customer's saying, "Hey, I see WordPress as an option," and you're like, "Okay, well, here's ShoutCMS, and let me tell you why it's different." Maybe you can talk a bit about that.
You mentioned it. I think WordPress is really good, and it has its place in the marketplace. They've done incredibly well. The challenge, not just with WordPress, but with all systems that you have to plug in, is that eventually at some point, whether WordPress changes or one of the plugins change, something tends to break. Again, I think we underestimate the challenges that a non-technical person has with adding a plugin.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of complexity in that. It sounds really simple, but it's a lot. I think it's also really difficult for the web designer. And so the web designers are also having a challenge, combining these systems in order to make things work elegantly and for a really long time. And so what we've done with Shout is we've taken a look at the core features that the average business needs. And we've made them as standard standard features. And so the advantage that the customer has is when they're using any one part of our system, it's a very similar or a familiar interface. And so when you're creating a contact, or you're creating a blog, or when you're adding a new product, it's really, really familiar, and it works seamlessly with every other component. And you know it's going to work for the life of the product.
Yeah.
I think if you're a small business and your sales or your brand depends on your website, having something like WordPress is a bit risky, knowing that it might break with an update. And so we've basically taken care of that feature. You don't have to worry about it breaking. You don't have to worry about upgrades. It basically just works 100% of the time.
And that's because it's cloud-based, just for clarity for anyone who's curious about that. So let's look at the other flip side of it, because one of the other things that I found really interesting in one of my consulting engagements I've been doing was, oddly enough, trying to convince my customer that spending $500,000 on a website wasn't necessary, because there's a perception in the industry that, okay, I have this many employees and my company makes this much money, therefore I need to spend this much money on a CMS. Otherwise, I'm not getting enough value, or the CMS isn't going to be powerful enough. Now, in this particular instance, the CMS actually accounts for an incredibly small percentage of their sales. It has a very low amount of traffic, but the company still is under the understanding, or at least the misconception that, hey, if I don't spend $500,000, then the product that I'm getting isn't good enough. And so how do you speak to that misperception in the industry of, like, where do I fit as a customer? So how do you think, where do you think you guys fit? Like,
I think that I don't know if we're going to resolve some of that thinking in the big companies that might stick around for a long time. But you bring up a really good point. Why does it cost $50,000 or $20,000 or $10,000 to build a website? And I think for that very reason is that we talked about earlier, is that the simple systems require a lot of tweaking in order to make it work. The larger platforms are just expensive because they're really complicated. We've worked really hard at making something really complicated easy to use. Now, there's still a learning curve, and so it's not something that you're going to come in and you're going to know everything. But for the average user, whether you're a small company or a large company, it's going to be easier to use and it's going to do more. And so what we've tried to do is not sacrifice some of the simpler things for usability. So it does the simple things, but it also does the complex things. With regards to large enterprises, I think we're a good solution, because we do a lot of what they need, but it's simple. And so something that might cost $100,000, it will cost $50,000 if you're using ShoutCMS, and you'll get the same kind of benefits from using it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, right? I mean, you, especially as a customer, I think what customers really need to get down to, what are the features I need, as opposed to looking at a price and saying, okay, this is priced at this, therefore it's not the right product because that price points out. It's not like, for me, for instance, right? To drive from my house to come down here and visit you, do I need to drive a Mercedes, or can I just get here in whatever vehicle I happen to have?
Well, I think there's a superficial cost, actually, for some of the larger systems, and so they're charging you that because you're a big company,
and because they can,
and so in reality it doesn't cost that much more. And so one of the things that we've adopted is we only bill our customers for really what costs us, and so there's no limit to the number of products, there's no limit to the number of admin users, there's no limit to what you do with the site. Things that cost us translate into what we bill you, and so essentially that's space and bandwidth.
Yeah.
And those are things that we pay for. And as you, but what we find is that as your site gets bigger and busier, paying a few extra dollars for maintenance and hosting really doesn't bother you. And I think that we're novel in that respect in our industry.
So what do you think is going to be the next kind of goal? I mean, you guys are, everyone that's going to be coming to our site around the same time that this interview is aired, they're going to see more about your product. They're going to get like a walkthrough of it. They're going to start hearing more about ShoutCMS. But now that you've got, your new editor that's in there now, looks really slick. You've got all this functionality that you've been, working towards for a decent chunk of time. What's going to be your next major thing? Have you thought that through yet? Where you're going to go next?
We're going to be building new features and enhancing the ones that we have. Our focus in the future is addressing the real problems that the business community has. And for the most part, the business community needs help with their marketing, with their content, with their processes. And so we've invested a lot of time in asking the question, how does the tool that we use change the way that I work? And we think that process and building process into the tool and educating the customer as they go through the system will make a much better experience for the end user. And so in 2016, among some of the other things that we're doing, we're going to heavily invest into enhancing the result and the experience that a non-tech person has when they're using our system.
Right on. Okay, Dragan, well that kind of concludes the questions that I had for you. Did you have any final thoughts you wanted to share with our readers?
Well, I'm happy to kind of announce that our official release on CMS Critic in the first quarter of 2016. We're really excited to see how the community takes us, and we're looking forward to doing more interviews.
Right on. Well, thanks, man. Appreciate you having me.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. So for those of you out there that are still with us, hopefully you all are, you're going to be learning a lot more about ShoutCMS. We're going to have a walkthrough of the product on the site. There'll be a number of featured articles during their featured week. I strongly recommend you take a look at ShoutCMS.com and get some good insight into the product, explore it a little bit, and watch some of the videos that we have on the walkthrough. I think you'll find it's a very intuitive product. Thanks again, Dragan.
Thanks.